There is a particular kind of autumn rain that falls on old money neighborhoods, steady, gray, the kind that turns gravel driveways dark and makes the manicured hedges glisten and drips from the porticos of large white houses in a way that manages to look, even in bad weather, deliberately picturesque. It was in that kind of rain, on a Saturday afternoon in late October, that a man named Julian Ashford stood on the driveway of his late father's family estate, holding his sleeping 4-year-old daughter against his chest, a stack of leather suitcases on the gravel beside him, while his uncle pointed toward the gate with the practiced, imperious certainty of someone who has spent 70 years believing that authority and volume are essentially the same thing. "You were never the right choice," his uncle said, the words carrying across the wet driveway with the particular carrying quality of voices shaped by decades of being listened to without question. "Your father's romanticism was his greatest flaw, and this arrangement is the proof of it." Julian said nothing. He held his daughter a little closer, shifted her weight gently so she would not wake, and looked at the gate. He had a call to make. He simply chose to make it from somewhere else. Julian Ashford was 32 years old. He was the only son of Robert Ashford, who had passed away 6 weeks earlier after a long illness, and the primary heir to a modest family legacy that had, over the past 3 years, become considerably less modest due to a series of business decisions that Robert had entrusted to Julian's management beginning when Julian was 29. Julian's daughter, Ren, was the child of a relationship that had ended before her birth, her mother having made clear that she did not intend to remain in either Julian's or Ren's life, a decision that had been painful in the immediate term and that Julian had, over 4 years of sole parenthood, gradually stopped spending energy mourning because the energy was needed elsewhere. He had raised Ren largely outside the formal Ashford family structure, not by deliberate exclusion, but because the family's social geography and his own preferred life had never naturally overlapped, and because Robert Ashford, whatever his private feelings about his son's unconventional choices, had respected Julian's independence enough not to engineer proximity where Julian hadn't asked for it. The family estate had been left, by Robert's will, to Julian in its entirety. This was the source of today's scene. His uncle, Gerard Ashford, had expected a different outcome, had been expecting it, in fact, for the better part of 30 years, and had received the news of Robert's actual decision with a fury that had been building, in carefully managed social form, since the will's reading 3 weeks earlier, and had now apparently reached its natural culmination in an eviction of a man who was, legally speaking, being expelled from his own inheritance. Julian was aware of this irony. He had decided, on the drive over that morning, not to raise it. He had come to the estate that day not to claim the property. The lawyers were handling that process in their own careful way, but for a smaller, more personal reason, a box of his father's books that he had asked to retrieve, things Robert had specifically noted in a private letter as intended for Julian to have. Gerard had met him at the door. The conversation that followed had been, in Gerard's telling, a confrontation about the will's legitimacy and the family's collective sense of having been wronged by Robert's decision. In Julian's telling, it had been a man with significant financial expectations that had not been met, expressing those unmet expectations at considerable volume, while Julian held a sleeping 4-year-old and waited to be finished being yelled at so he could collect his father's books and leave. "Everything here belongs to the family," Gerard had said, at the end, his voice settling into the particular cold register of someone who has moved from anger to something more deliberately cutting. "You were never the right fit for this family, Julian. Your father knew that, whatever he wrote in that document. You and that child are not welcome here." He had pointed at the gate. Julian had looked at him for a long moment, long enough to make the silence matter, and then had turned, picked up Ren, and walked to the gate. He stood on the driveway for a moment, the rain continuing, Ren still asleep against his shoulder with the particular complete unconsciousness of a child who had fallen asleep in the car an hour earlier and was not planning to acknowledge the existence of weather or family drama until she was good and ready. He took out his phone. He called his attorney, Marcus Greeley, who answered on the 3rd ring. "Marcus," he said, "I need you to accelerate the property transition paperwork for the estate. And separately, the Meridian property. Is it ready to receive residents?" A pause. "The Meridian property has been ready since August," Marcus said carefully. Julian, what's happened? Nothing that changes anything legally, Julian said. I'd simply like to move Ren into the house tomorrow rather than next month. Is that achievable? Entirely, Marcus said. I'll arrange it tonight. Thank you, Julian said, and put his phone away. He looked back at the estate's white facade one more time, the rain running evenly from its portico in the particular way it had done since before he was born, and then he turned and walked toward the car, adjusting Ren's sleeping weight with the easy competence of 4 years of practice. He did not look back again. The Meridian property, which was how Julian had always referred to it, in the same understated, matter-of-fact way he referred to most things, was a house on Meridian Hill that his father had purchased privately in Julian's name 7 years earlier, when Robert had made the particular calculation that his son's business instincts were considerably sharper than the family's collective opinion of them, and had wanted to ensure that Julian had a foundation that existed entirely outside the family structure and its attendant complications. It was, by objective measure, a significant property. The main house was large and well-built, set on 4 acres of old-growth land, with a separate guest house, a long gravel approach, and a view from the east-facing rooms that had been, on the 2 occasions Julian had brought visitors to see it, the first thing anyone mentioned upon walking in. Julian had not, for reasons he had never fully articulated even to himself, moved in. He had maintained it carefully. A property manager, a small maintenance staff, the house kept in a state of quiet readiness, and had continued, through the years of building his business and raising Ren, to live in the modest apartment in the city where he had lived since his mid-20s, because the apartment was convenient and he had never quite found the occasion to make the move. Gerard's pointing finger, as it turned out, was that occasion. He told Ren about it that evening, after she had woken from her car nap with the slightly disoriented cheerfulness of a child who had slept through an entire adult drama and emerged on the other side requiring only a snack and approximately 4 minutes to fully recalibrate. We're going to move, Julian said, cutting her apple into the careful thin slices she preferred. Into a new house. Tomorrow. Ren processed this. A big house or a small house? A big house. Bigger than this apartment? Considerably bigger. She considered this with the pragmatic seriousness she brought to most factual questions. Does it have a garden? Yes. With actual grass? Not cement. Actual grass, Julian confirmed. And trees. Okay, Ren said, apparently satisfied that the essential variables had been covered. Can I bring my books? We'll bring everything. Okay. She ate a slice of apple. Why are we moving tomorrow? Usually moving is a whole thing. Sometimes, Julian said carefully, grown-ups make decisions faster than usual when the situation is clear. Is it clear? She asked. Very, he said. They moved the following morning, which was a Sunday, the rain of the previous afternoon having given way to the particular clean, washed light of an October morning after weather, the sky sharp and blue, the leaves catching it, everything looking more itself than usual. Marcus had arranged, with characteristic efficiency, for a small moving crew to handle the apartment's contents. Julian's housekeeper, Bertha, who had worked for him since Ren's birth and had received the news of the move the previous evening with a satisfaction she did not trouble herself to conceal, supervised the process with the brisk authority of someone who had been waiting for exactly this development. Ren walked through the Meridian house for the first time that morning while the movers carried boxes through the front door and conducted her inspection with the thorough, unhurried attention of someone taking a job seriously. She declared the kitchen acceptable, the main staircase excellent, its very stair wide, and the east-facing sitting room the best room I've ever seen in my life, actually. A verdict that Julian thought was probably accurate. In the garden, which she entered through the French doors off the sitting room with the solemn purpose of someone completing an inspection, she stood for a moment in the October light, the grass damp from yesterday's rain, the old trees at the property's edge throwing long shadows across the lawn, and tilted her head back to look at the sky. Dad, yes. This is our house now. Yes, he said, and nobody can make us leave. She looked at him, small, entirely unaware of the full story, asking the question with the particular directness of someone who has absorbed enough of an adult's tension to want reassurance about the essential facts. Nobody can make us leave, he said. She nodded once, satisfied, and went to investigate whether the tree in the far corner was climbable. The legal process regarding the estate concluded over the following months without significant drama. Gerard's challenges to the will's validity had been anticipated by Robert's lawyers, who had prepared accordingly, and were resolved in Julian's favor with an efficiency that reflected the thoroughness of a man who had known, well in advance, that his brother was unlikely to receive the news graciously. Julian did not pursue any of the various outcomes that might have been available to him beyond what the legal process itself produced. He took what his father had intended him to have, and he let the rest go, and he did not spend significant time dwelling on the Saturday afternoon in the rain. He was asked about it once by a journalist writing a profile piece several years later, who had heard the story from a peripheral source and found it, in the way of journalists, interesting. "Your uncle had the family estate the day your father's will was settled in your favor," she said. "And you had the more significant property the entire time and hadn't moved in. Why not?" Julian considered this. "I was waiting for a reason that felt clear," he said. "The apartment was fine. It was convenient. Inertia is comfortable. And then someone pointed at a gate and said something unkind about my daughter, and the reason became entirely clear. What did it feel like, walking into the Meridian house the next morning? My daughter said it was the best room she'd ever seen in her life," he said. "I thought that was a reasonable assessment." Wren grew up in the house on Meridian Hill, the particular house that had been waiting for her for 4 years before she knew it existed, in the garden under the climbable tree and among the rooms full of her grandfather's books, which had eventually arrived through separate channels once the legal process concluded. She remembered very little of the Saturday in the rain. What she remembered, instead, was the Sunday morning, the October light and the wet grass, and her father standing at the French doors watching her try to climb the tree, not rushing her, not checking his phone, simply present in the particular, complete way he was always present when it was just the two of them and the day had not yet decided what it was going to be. That was the memory she kept. The tree, the light, the sense of something being, simply and without drama, exactly where it was supposed to be. Perhaps that is the quiet truth tucked inside a rainy Saturday afternoon like this one, that the people who try to diminish us with pointed fingers and unkind words very often have no idea what they are pointing us toward. The things we have been building quietly, the foundations laid carefully over years without announcement or performance, have a way of revealing themselves at precisely the moment we need them most. Sometimes the gate someone points you toward opens onto something they never imagined you already owned.